Hey everyone! So today I'm going to walk you through the basic finishing methods for my Lola panties, which I am just re-releasing. So in the re-release, I've added additional sizes, as well as some different tutorials so that you can sew it in a few different ways. So I'm going to show you two different ways today. I'm going to show you how to finish the leg line with a stretch lace, and I'm also going to show you how to finish it with some stabilizing elastic. So you can see here I've cut out my Lola panties. I'm using a sheer stretch mesh. I've already gone ahead and I've serged the upper edge of my gusset lining, and I've sewn the back together down the center back seam. So once that's done, the next step is to sew the gusset seam. So I start by taking my panties front and I lay it like that. I open up my panties back and I lay it over top. And from here you can baste this together or pin it. Or if you're brave like me, you can just go ahead and layer your lining over top. So now you've basically sandwiched your panties back between your panties front and your lining piece. So your panties back, the right side is facing the right side of the panties front. Okay, so I'm going to line these up and send them through my sewing machine really quick. You can also serge this seam. I'm just going to trim that back a little. And then when you straighten it out and you fold your gusset lining up towards the front of the panties, that seam allowance is now encased between your lining and your panties front. So at this point you can just baste along either edge of the gusset just to attach it to the panties front. So the way the Lola panties fit, they're already quite a tight fitting panty. So you don't want to make this leg line very tight. It really doesn't need any elastic finishing at all. But sometimes when you sew it in a slinkier knit, like say a bamboo jersey, a lightweight bamboo jersey, sometimes you're going to want to stabilize this edge with some elastic. So I'm going to demonstrate that here so you can see how little tension I put on my elastic. But in reality, most of the time you're not going to want to put any kind of elastic around this edge. So once we've sewn our gusset lining, we can go ahead and do the leg finishing. So working from the inside of your garment, I'm going to demonstrate using a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine and some regular 1/4 inch elastic, but you can also use clear elastic. I'm just using this because it's easier to demonstrate with. So I'm switching my sewing machine to a zigzag stitch. And I'm not pulling on the elastic at all. So again, this finish is just for knits that are quite slinky. So a cotton lycra jersey likely will not need this stabilization, but something a little slinkier like a bamboo or a rayon, lightweight rayon, you might want to add this stabilization to it. So you can see the elastic isn't cinching in that leg line at all. It's just acting as a stabilizer. So if you're using a zigzag stitch, just want to make sure that you trim back any excess fabric that extends along your elastic. Or you can use a serger to apply your stabilizing elastic, which is the way that I like to do it. If you're not adding a stabilizing elastic, you just omit this step entirely. So the next leg finish I wanted to show you for the Lola panties is using a stretch lace. So I just have a narrow 1 inch wide elasticized lace trim here. And I'm going to work from the right side of my garment using a zigzag stitch. I'm going to stitch this right onto the top, and I'm not pulling on my lace at all. Because the leg line of the Lola is already quite fitted, we don't need to add any tension here. It fits like a cheeky boy short, so if it's too tight along the back especially, it's going to cut in across your cheek and create an unsightly lump. And you might find that it just fits uncomfortably if you're making this leg line too tight around the front. So my outer edge is running alongside the outer edge of my garment. There, so you can see it's really not cinching that leg line in at all. The elastic just kind of stabilizes that outer edge. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to repeat this on the opposite side, and then from there we'll work on our side seams and waist elastic. So I've finished both of my samples here. This one I've done stretch lace around the leg line, and I've actually done 2 rows of zigzag stitching. I just find I hate it when I have a pair of panties and a stitch breaks and the lace starts coming off, so I always do 2 rows just for backup, but you can do just 1 if you prefer. And like I mentioned, I haven't pulled on the lace or my stabilizing elastic at all when I've put them on because they already fit really snug. All this stabilizing elastic is doing is preventing it from stretching out too much. And the same goes with the lace, and the lace is just pretty. So from here, we can go ahead and sew 1 side seam. So you just put the right sides together. With the lace, well, with both versions, but especially the lace, just make sure that your bottom edge lines up nicely. So I'm going to sew that together on my serger. And I'm going to do the same with this pair too. So again, right sides together, line up that lower elasticized edge, and then you can sew your seam. So now we have something that's really starting to resemble a little pair of boy shorts. I'm going to show 2 methods of applying waist elastic. I'm going to do fold over elastic on this pair, and I'm going to do a decorative elastic on that one. So I'm going to start with the fold over elastic, which is so easy to put on. It's my favorite. So starting on the inside of the garment, at your open side seam, use a zigzag stitch and just zigzag stitch it on. Again, you don't want to put a lot of tension on this elastic. You barely want to put any. And you're trying to line the fold line up with the raw edge of the waist. I'm sorry if I'm coughing or sniffling. I'm getting over a nasty cold. So at this point, I just trim back any excess fabric that extends beyond my stitching line. This just makes it a little bit easier for you to fold it over. You can see I haven't really pulled very tightly on my elastic because these are a very fitted pair of panties already. So our elastic doesn't really need to cinch things in too much. So I'm going to fold the elastic along the fold line, and I'm working on the front of the garment now. And using a zigzag stitch, I'm just stitching that in place. So that is a nice bound elastic waistline. And then from here we can turn it inside out again. And I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to pin this together down the side seam. It's really important that this elastic edge lines up nicely. We want it to look continuous. And I'm going to run it through my sewing machine first and then through the serger. And this closes up our final side seam. So you can try to kind of pull it together so that that top edge lines up nicely. So that's what it looks like when it's inside out. And when I turn it right side out, this pair is almost done. So for this pair, I'm going to use a decorative elastic. So I have this elastic with a looped edge. And I'm going to start by working on the right side of the garment. And I'm going to place my elastic so that the decorative edge is pointing down. And still using a zigzag stitch. Just going to anchor that on. So just like before, I'm not really putting much tension on this elastic. You can also apply the elastic with your serger. I'm just using a zigzag stitch. Just like before, you can trim back any excess fabric. So just snip close to your zigzag stitching line. It's a little fiddly. So now that you've zigzag stitched the decorative elastic onto the right side of the waist edge, and you've trimmed back any excess fabric that extends beyond your stitching line, we can go ahead and sew the remaining side seam. And the way I do it with this type of elastic is I fold my elastic towards the back on both sides, and then I line those up so the right sides are together. I'm going to stick a little pin in there to hold it together. Make sure that your lace edge lines up nicely at the bottom. And then you can sew that side seam closed. I'm just going to finish that with my serger. So this is our inside. This is from the back. I'm going to turn it right side out. And we still have to top stitch around our waist edge. So I'm going to switch my machine back to a zigzag stitch. And starting at this join, I'm going to just fold my seam allowance towards the back. And I'm going to top stitch the elastic down. So we've already folded the elastic towards the back when we sewed our side seam. So I'm top stitching through the front, or top stitching on the right side, and the decorative edge of my elastic is just peeking out over that folded edge. There. So you can see I've got a nice decorative edge and lace trimmed legs. So that pair is basically done other than snipping your seams. The pair that we did with the stabilized elastic, I still have to turn this edge under and top stitch it. So just once again to reiterate, the Lola panties don't require any elastic along the leg line unless you're sewing them out of a really kind of slinky fabric. And in that case, you're only putting the elastic on as a stabilizer. It's not meant to cinch it in. So if you're using like a cotton lycra jersey, that type of fabric, you'll likely just want to serge this edge and turn it under and top stitch it with a twin needle, or you could use a zigzag stitch or a cover stitch. But I've used a stabilizing elastic here just to demonstrate how to apply that. So I'm just going to really quickly switch over to a twin needle. And just remember to switch your machine back to a straight stitch. And just turn your edge under. It gets turned under about 1/4 of an inch, or the width of your serging, or the width of your elastic if you have elasticized the edge. And you're just making sure that your needles are just covering that left edge of your elastic or of your serging, or the raw edge, whatever way you finished it. I'm a firm believer that you should experiment with different finishes. I don't really think that there's one specific right way to sew a garment. There's lots of different ways to finish and sew things, and different ways to achieve different looks. So I really am a big proponent of experimenting with different techniques. And I have somehow wound up with a little hole in my fabric. So I'm just going to try to forget that that exists. And this will probably get thrown into my slightly flawed sample pile. Which, mentioning that, I'm going to be having a sample sale coming up soon with lots of one-of-a-kind pieces and slightly flawed pieces, or pieces that just didn't quite make it into my collection. All of that kind of thing. So if you're in the market for some ready-made pieces, keep an eye on my shop. So there. That shows you two different ways to finish the waist, two different ways to finish the legs, and you can get a lot of different looks with the Lola pattern. I hope you found that helpful. Thanks.